Tonight, on Closer Look, it's every landlord's worst nightmare, a tenant who stops paying rent and refuses to leave. That was the reality for Bradford's Michelle Taddeo and her partner Tony Natale for more than 2 years. Bradford Today reporter Michael Owen has been covering this story and joins us tonight from Bradford with more. Michael, we hear these stories all the time about renters who trash the place they're renting, then refuse to pay rent, leaving the landlord in limbo to deal with a system that many say is broken in Ontario. Tell us about Michelle and Tony. What's their situation?
Well, right now their situation is not great. On the upside, they were able to get an eviction notice, so they do have their unit back. They do have full control of their home again. But on the downside, once they finally did get the unit back, they found what was once a fully finished basement apartment is now sort of reminiscent of a demolition zone. They've got very large holes in doors and walls. There's damage to faucets and sinks and cupboards. There's damage to ceiling and floor tiles. There's even some damage to some of the appliances like a stove and a fridge. They estimate that all that could cost up to $10,000 to repair, and that's on top of almost $26,000 in unpaid rent and more than $3,000 in legal fees that they had to pay to go through the tribunal process.
Wow. Michael, we've often heard how frustrating that process of dealing with the Landlord-Tenant Board can be. Can you walk us through the experience that Michelle and Tony had and what the outcome of the tribunal was?
Yeah, absolutely. They initially filed in September 2023, but it took about 5 months before they could get a hearing, and unfortunately, due to a minor error in the application, it was initially dismissed. Then they had to wait another 6 months for a second hearing, but by then the docket was so full, the matter was just put over another 3 months. At that point, they did finally get their eviction notice, but they had to give the tenant another almost 2 months until February 2nd to vacate, and they had to waive any unpaid rent up to that point.
So you mentioned, Michael, the thousands of dollars that they're now out. What about small claims court? Is that an option?
Technically, yes, but for Michelle and Tony, it's just not very realistic. The process can be long, it can be expensive, and even if they are successful in being awarded an order for compensation, there's really no guarantee that they'll be able to collect.
Yeah, it's a good point. Michael, how representative is this story of the experiences faced by small landlords in the province? And have there been any updates or responses from advocacy groups like the Small Ownership Landlords of Ontario or government officials to cases like this?
Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, these cases seem to be more and more common, as we're seeing from reporting from my colleagues in places like Collingwood Today, Midland Today, Aurelia Matters. But also, like you mentioned, Solo, the group, they have almost or roughly 8,200 members. They have plenty of stories on their website dealing with similar issues. And they estimate that since early 2020, their members have lost about $21 million dealing with these issues. Now, that's self-reported, so it is hard to verify. But they also estimate that in the GTA alone, between 50 and 75 landlords exit the real estate market every month.
Now, Michelle and Tony have decided that they will no longer rent out their Bradford property. What are the broader implications of landlords deciding to stop renting out properties? Michael, what does it mean for the rental market in Ontario?
It can be difficult to say for sure. For this piece, we focused specifically on Michelle and Tony, so we didn't ask any of the local economists or real estate experts to speculate on what this could mean long term. But based solely on supply and demand, the fewer rental units there are on the market, the more likely it is that the remaining ones will become more expensive, and that could long term compound the affordability cost of living crisis we're seeing here in the province.
You mentioned the emotional toll this process took on the landlords. Did they share any specific recommendations or advice for landlords who might be facing similar situations?
Yeah. Michelle's advice was fairly blunt. She said, don't be a landlord, especially if you plan to live in the same structure as your tenant, like if they happen to be in a basement apartment, for example. For her right now, it's just not worth the risk, at least not until the province can update the regulations to better balance the needs of both renters and landlords.
All right, there's Michael Owen, reporter at Bradford Today on tonight's Closer Look.